Scott Wright, General and Artistic Director of Mobile Opera, and I have Kevin Lee here. Kevin is the Fine Arts Editor for Lagniappe Mobile, an artist himself, if you read any of his writing, and certainly a supporter and encourager of all artists. So how did that come to be? What got you started on the arts trail?
Early '03, Lagniappe took me on as a general columnist for about 8 issues. And then Fred Baldwin, who was the arts editor up at that point, bowed out. Anyway, so when that opening came up, I quickly asked him if I could do it. And part of the reason I wanted to was just because I've always been, sorry for the cough, I've always been intrigued by or involved in arts. I mean, when I was, at one point I tried to go to the Alabama School of Fine Arts when I was a kid, or when I was a teenager. At any rate, so I've always been involved in it. Plus, my knowledge of alternative newspapers are that they tended to be very arts and entertainment oriented. So I kind of figured that section would have a lot of sway over the course of the paper. And so that was part of the self-serving reason that I wanted to do that. That was my genesis for stepping into that role at that outlet.
I read just recently that there were 2,000 small papers in the United States that went out of business last year.
Yeah, that's been the trend for 15 years or so. And the thing that it's really interesting because what did end newspapers, the loss of classifieds as much as anything else. You can post ads for things and reach a much wider audience for free online, and that just knocked out classified advertising from newspapers.
And much quicker. It hurt on the news side too, because now you have this constant pipeline disgorging all kinds of information. That's hard for a newspaper, even a daily. It's hard for them to keep up because by the time they get their news out, everybody's heard it. Where we particularly miss the newsprint is the local, and I'm really glad that Lagniappe helps to fill that gap.
Right. Actually, the other hole that's there with newspapers that sadly isn't being filled was newspapers are really good for deep investigative reporting. When newspapers lost a lot of their revenue, one of the places that it took a huge hit was in investigative reporting, because investigative reporting is expensive.
You're in a peculiar position to see and know about all of the local art scene and what's going on around here. And we're all in the peculiar position of having had a year where we just kind of parked it in the garage and hoped that it would start when we got back to it. What do you see as far as the local future of fine arts? And of course, my interest is performing arts, but I include them all.
Well, during that year when everything was parked in the garage, normally when it's in the garage, you go out there and crank it up every now and again to make sure the battery stays going. So with performing arts, that was particularly hard unless you went outside.
Well, we did a little of that. Mobile Opera did some video, and I think, which is not the best way to see opera, but it was what we could do. So we did something. The question is just whether the audiences and the donors will come back and when.
Right. And that's going to break down to a matter of how safe they feel. I think people that are vaccinated are going to feel safe. It's just that simple. If you're vaccinated, you're going to feel like you can go into a crowd. I mean, because we're seeing that already.
Yeah, I agree.
So as long as the vaccines remain readily available, so that those that feel most vulnerable are able to access them, then I think that they will fare better. I think once people just kind of get back in the habit of going, that'll help.
Looking at your crystal ball, do you think that that audience attitude is going to allow, let's say, normal operations as in pre-pandemic by fall?
If everything continues on the course it's on now, yes. I think when the new season comes around, if everything stays the way it is now, I think things will revive. The unknown variable in there, of course, would be the unexpected rise of any particular variant of this virus. Whenever we're talking about epidemiology, that's always, that's always a possibility. How strong the possibility is a different story. But I'm saying, barring that, right now, scientifically, we're in a fairly good spot to be able to deal with something like this, because I'm a science buff, and over the course of my life, the idea, if you had told me 25 years ago that we would have a new virus come out like this, and within a year and a half have a workable vaccine for it, I would have laughed at you. So I think the more we go past this and the safer people feel, I think they're going to bounce back mentally from it, and they'll have no qualms about wading into a crowd.
Why do we need to get back to normal with the arts?
Because it builds community, because it's a shared experience. You touched on that earlier. I mean, sharing an experience with somebody, there's a whole school of thought in art that that's built around the idea that shared experience is in itself an art form. That creating something for people to experience together, regardless of what got them together, that the art lies in the communal experience. I got a great example for you here. Do you remember the show Northern Exposure?
Yeah.
All right. Do you remember the episode where Chris built the trebuchet and flung the piano?
Vaguely.
Okay. He was the artist DJ that lived in town. He was a performance artist. And flung this piano. Everybody met out at this dry lake bed, and he made some speech that had, some excerpts from, who was it? James Joyce and some other writer in there. Cuts the rope, piano gets flung out over the dry lake bed, and while it's tumbling through the air, the showrunners have it's tumbling in slow motion, and it's cutting back and forth and showing the faces of the people that were watching it, and we're hearing the Blue Danube Waltz play. Then at the end of it, when it crashes, everybody kind of looks, they're like, wow, well, look at that. And they all kind of clap. But the thing is, the art wasn't the piano being flung. What happened there was that they're drawing together and they're sharing that experience of the emotions that they were feeling and witnessing that. That was the art. That was what the art actually was. It wasn't the piano, and it wasn't the trebuchet that had been built. It was the shared communal experience. And I think things like that we need, especially in a time like this where so much of our social interaction has moved online, and the way that social media has really driven a stake into the heart of our society and our culture. I think part of the problems that we're seeing among ourselves right now with a lot of the polarization and the viciousness that you see between people have been hastened by social media, because people act completely different when they're in a room with somebody than they do when they're not.
Sure.
They're hiding behind the anonymity of a keyboard. And I think the sooner we can get back to that, the better off we'll all be. Anybody that loves music can tell you that there's something different about live music than there is about recorded music.
I know that we communicate in ways that that we don't understand, ways where we, singers talk about how they can feel the audience. They know when they're with them. When all of the breath in the room, all of the heartbeats become one, then however you romanticize it, there's still something that is palpable and real about a shared experience, sitting in the dark with a bunch of other people feeling the same emotions at the same time that you can't really describe adequately, but you know it when you feel it. You know it when you experience it.
That bonds people to each other when they do that.
And we particularly need that. So artists have a real urge to make art, and art's patrons have a real urge to experience art. And so the best experience is that live experience. I think and over people said how grateful they were that we were actually doing something, that how pleased they were to be able to get out after a year and really go to something that was live. So I think they're going to come back in droves, honestly. And it could even be that it turns out to be a little revival of the performing arts. I don't know if I'm ready to go that. Yeah, I'm with you, but that would be awfully nice if it were.
Yeah, for sure. I think that Mobile's lucky in that we've got options here that most people don't realize we have. And I've said this in my column several times, that Mobilians in general don't realize how dedicated and fervent a core of art supporters we have in this town. Because there's towns that are, for instance, the other day I interviewed that behind our scene here is this core group of, I would estimate maybe at the most 2,000 people that are making all this go. And that may be a very generous estimate. That may be a very, very generous estimate, because I could be including season ticket holders.
Well, I think you have to include season ticket holders. You buy a season ticket, you sort of make an investment in the company.
Yep.
You buy single tickets, you're just doing that so you can see the show.
Right.
And you want both, but you really want season subscribers. They're the people.
Well, I think younger people also draw more to entertainment than art, for one thing. I think also they have as you said, they have much more of an a la carte approach to things. Younger people normally have a very busy social life. They tend to do things on the spur of the moment. I mean, and I'm reflecting on my own experience when I say that. When I was in my 20s, I'd just go out and do something on a lark. We didn't ever really plan that much. It was like, because a lot of times you didn't know what you'd have time to do, things like that. Where you'd find out my friends are going here, so you're going there as a social thing. And then as you get older, you become curious about the other art forms that you maybe weren't exposed to when you were younger. And I think a lot of those season ticket holders are people that were like that when they were in their 20s, they weren't listening to Beethoven or Puccini. As time went on, they grew more curious about it. So maybe I think that's a good part of the gulf in age that you're looking at right there.
Well, and from our standpoint, from the opera standpoint, I know that's true because, we've had criticisms before, and I think I've told you this before, that people will say, well, your average donor is probably 70 years old or more. And that's true, but it was true 30 years ago. So they should be 100, but they're not. They're still in that, so that people kind of, I don't know if you could call it graduate into different areas of the arts, but they come to an appreciation of some of them. Plus, they reach a point where they have a greater ability to be philanthropic, I suppose, as they get older too. But there is a huge social element to the arts, and we have to live within it, and we have to deal with it.
Right. And you also have to consider that in America in the 20th century, musical theater sprang up and occupied that place that opera did in Europe.
That's true.
I mean, we had an explosion of musical theater here in the 20th century.
Yep.
And that's what did that. I think one key to keeping opera pertinent is the development of new operas. I think, if you want to make Americans relate to operas, create operas that are based on American stories. An opera about John Henry, an opera about Paul Bunyan, maybe, or something along those lines. Not necessarily Paul Bunyan per se.
There is one about Paul
Bunyan.
Bunyan.
A giant blue ox.
There is one about Paul Bunyan. It's
Oh, is there?
Yeah, there's an opera about it. There's an opera about one of the ones that's really gotten a lot of attention lately is the Dead Man Walking, about the execution of a
based on
killer in Louisiana, and a nun's efforts.
Sister Prejean.
Yep. And then there's also Glory Denied. And Kevin Putz wrote a really lovely little opera called Silent Night, about the Christmas truce in World War I. we are all constantly in the arts, not just opera, but constantly in all arts. We're moving from tradition to innovation. But you can't move too fast. You got to figure out where that line is because tradition pays the bills. And innovation is great, but you've got to get people to come and to appreciate it. And it's the rare company that is so innovative or that has an audience which will allow them to be terribly innovative, and say, oh, we can't wait. We're supporting you because we can't wait for the next new thing that you do. So if you have a limited number to choose from and a limited budget, then you try to do something that's a little different every now and then, as opposed to all of the time. So I think it is changing, and I think it will change. And somewhere along the line, as those 25-year-olds become 70-year-olds, they'll be appreciating opera. They just might not be appreciating the very same operas that we're watching now.
Right, and that's key. As long as you can get them in the room the first time, that's what sells it. Because you got to be in the room with that. You got to be in the room with that voice to appreciate it.
That's right.
Yeah. And then once they do, they tell people, "Wow, you wouldn't believe I was sitting there crying when." Man, something I came across in the last year that was a young man, and he was, at the suggestion of someone, reacting to this video online of Pavarotti doing Nessun Dorma. And he had never been exposed to opera. He was like, oh, okay, well, I'll see what this is about. And this kid was crying at the end of this. And he was just all like reduced to the point where he almost couldn't talk. And this was just from a recording. He had never seen or heard anything like that. And to me, I thought it was a great illustration of why arts education is as important as it is. It was touching to watch how deeply he was moved by it. And it was something completely culturally removed from him. It was just the power or the majesty of somebody's voice.
Yep, it happens. And I'm really hoping that we'll have the opportunity to get back in the schools, because that's really important to us. This last year, for safety's sake, we were just completely shut out on those education programs. So
yeah, I've heard Stacy talk about those, and I think that's a great program.
It requires no training to appreciate art when it's put out before you. So
yeah, which is great, because that's how that's building for the future.
We need it now.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, man, I've enjoyed talking with you. It was
Is that all your questions?
No, but